The transition from sleeping under the stars to living behind four walls is the single most important pivot in human history. It wasn't a sudden invention, but a frantic, multi-million year experiment in survival. We start our story 3 million years ago. Our ancestors, the Australopithecines, were not builders, they were scavengers. If they needed shelter, they looked for a cave. If a cave wasn't available, they slept in trees. This was a defensive strategy. Predators like saber-toothed cats owned the night. To be on the ground after sunset was to be a snack. But about 2 million years ago, a shift occurred. Homo habilis appeared. These were the first tool makers. They were learning to manipulate their environment. We have evidence from sites like Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania that they were stacking stones. These weren't houses yet. They were windbreaks, a simple semicircle of rocks piled high enough to shield a fire from the wind. This is the moment humans realized they could alter the world to suit their bodies rather than just forcing their bodies to adapt to the world. Fast forward to 400,000 years ago, Homo heidelbergensis enters the scene. We found a site in Terra Amata near Nice, France. It is one of the most famous archaeological digs in history. Here we found post holes. These holes suggest that humans were no longer just piling stones. They were erecting temporary wooden huts. These structures were oval-shaped, roughly 15 feet by 20 feet. They used saplings as supports and covered them in animal hides or brush. This was a seasonal base camp. For the first time, humans were creating a controlled microenvironment. Why did they do it? The brain. As our brains grew, so did our caloric needs and our social complexity. A cave was cold, damp, and often occupied by bears. Building a hut allowed a group to stay in a location that was rich in resources, like a river valley, even when the weather turned sour. It was the birth of home field advantage. For most of the Paleolithic era, we stayed nomadic. We were hunter-gatherers. Our houses had to be portable. Think of the mammoth bone dwellings in Ukraine, dating back roughly 15,000 to 20,000 years. These were architectural feats. They used the skulls, tusks, and ribs of woolly mammoths to create a massive structural skeleton. They covered the frame with animal skins weighed down by more bones. Some of these structures reached over 20 feet in diameter. They weren't just shacks, they were statements of mastery over the largest land mammals of the Ice Age. But the real revolution, the moment everything changed, happened around 10,000 BCE in the Fertile Crescent. This is the Neolithic Revolution. We stopped following the herds and started planting seeds. Once you decide to plant wheat, you are tied to the dirt. You cannot leave when the harvest is still growing. This requirement forced the invention of permanent architecture. We see this at a site called Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey. Around 7,500 BCE, this was a city of 10,000 people, but there were no streets. The houses were built touching one another, sharing walls like a modern apartment complex. They were made of mud brick. The entrance was a hole in the roof. You climbed down a ladder into your living room. Why build like this? Defense. It created a solid outer perimeter. It kept the heat in during the winter and the dust out during the summer. It was the first instance of urban planning. Inside, people were burying their dead under the floorboards of their homes. This marks a profound shift in human psychology. The home was no longer just a shelter from the rain. It was a connection to the ancestors, a fixed point on the earth that anchored the family line. Then came the structural genius of the Levant. People began using lime plaster. They learned that if you take limestone and heat it to extreme temperatures, you create a substance that, when mixed with water and sand, becomes rock hard. They were paving their floors with colored, polished plaster. They were building homes that lasted generations. The science of construction grew with our understanding of physics. In Skara Brae, in the Orkney Islands of Scotland, dating to about 3,100 BCE, people built homes with built-in stone furniture. They had stone beds, stone cupboards, and stone hearths. These were semi-subterranean, buried into the earth for insulation against the brutal Atlantic winds. They survived because they were integrated into the landscape, not just sitting on top of it. But let's talk about the materials. The shift from wood and hide to mud brick and stone required a new cognitive ability, planning. You don't just build a mud brick house on a whim. You have to harvest the clay, mix it with straw to prevent cracking, shape the bricks, dry them in the sun, and source the timber for the roof beams. This required a supply chain. It required a division of labor. One person makes the bricks, another harvests the wood, another lays the mortar. Architecture turned us into specialists. It created the social stratification we see today. If you have the time and resources to build a larger, more durable house, you are likely a person of status. The house became a symbol of wealth, safety, and identity. By the time the ancient Mesopotamians were building ziggurats and the Egyptians were raising pyramids, we had mastered the arch, the post and lintel system, and the concept of a city block. We were no longer biological creatures reacting to our environment. We were architects of our own reality. We had built a shell around ourselves that allowed us to survive in deserts, in tundras, and in high mountains. Think about the sheer audacity of this. Our ancestors looked at a pile of mud and saw a fortress. They looked at a dead mammoth and saw a roof. They looked at a cave and decided they could do better. Building houses was the catalyst for almost everything else we recognize as human. It led to the storage of grain, which led to the creation of banks and accounts. It led to the creation of territory, which led to laws and governance. It led to the creation of the interior, which led to privacy, art, and the complex psychological inner life of the modern human. When you walk through your front door tonight and lock it, you are participating in a tradition that is millions of years old. You are relying on the same biological drive that compelled a shivering human to stack stones in a windbreak in the Olduvai Gorge. We are the species that refused to accept the climate. We are the species that took the raw, chaotic materials of the planet and molded them into a sanctuary. We are still that same animal at our core. We just have better materials now. The fundamental question remains the same as it was in the Paleolithic. How much of our environment can we control before the environment decides to take it back? We have moved from the caves to the skyscrapers, but we are still searching for the same thing. We are still looking for a place that says, "This is mine. This is where I am safe. This is where I belong." The house was our first great invention, but in many ways it is still our most important one. We built the house, and then the house built us.